Hey guys, it's Cassidy. I hope you're all doing well, getting ready for Halloween, colder weather. Today we're going to read the next part of Cinder by Marissa Meyer. I'm trying to find my place. Okay. Chapter 13. Your control panel is marvelously complex, some of the highest technology I've ever seen in a cyborg. Dr. Erland spun the holograph one way and then the other. And look at this wiring along your spine. It melds almost perfectly with your central nervous system. And look there. He pointed to the holograph's pelvis. Your reproductive system is almost untouched. You know, lots of female cyborgs are left infertile because of the invasive procedures, but from the looks of it, I don't suspect you'll have any problems. Cinder sat on one of the exam tables, chin settled atop both palms. Lucky me. The doctor wagged a finger at her. You should be grateful your surgeons took such care. I'm sure I'll feel much more grateful when I find a guy who thinks wiring in a girl is a turn-on. She kicked her heels at the base of the table. Does this have anything to do with my immunity? Maybe or maybe not. The doctor took a pair of spectacles from his pocket and slid them onto his face, still staring at the holograph. Cinder tilted her head. Don't they pay you enough for corrective eye surgery? I like the way these feel. Dr. Erland dragged the holograph down, revealing the inside of Cinder's head. Speaking of eye surgery, do you realize you're missing tear ducts? Really? And I thought I was just emotionally withdrawn. She pulled her feet up, hugging her knees. I'm also incapable of blushing, if that was going to be your next brilliant observation. He turned around, his eyes magnified behind their spectacles. Incapable of blushing? How so? My brain monitors my body temperature. Forces me to cool down if I get too warm too fast. I guess just sweating like a normal human wasn't enough. The doctor pulled a sports screen out, punched something in. That's really quite smart, he muttered. They must have been worried about your system overheating. Cinder strained her neck, but he couldn't see the screen on his port. Is that important? He ignored her. And look at your heart. Those two chambers are made primarily of silicone, mixed with biotissue. Amazing. Cinder pressed her hand against her chest. Her heart, her brain, her nervous system, what hadn't been tampered with? Her hand moved along her neck, tracing the ridges of her spine as her gaze traveled over the metal vertebrae, those metallic invaders. What's this? She asked, stretching forward and pointing to a shadow on the diagram. Ah, yes, my assistants and I were discussing that earlier. Dr. Erland scratched his head through the hat. It looks to be made of a different material than the vertebrae, and is right over a central cluster of nerves. Perhaps it was meant to correct a glitch? Cinder wrinkled her nose. Great, I have glitches. Has your neck ever bothered you? Only when I've been under a hover all day, and when I'm dreaming. In her nightmare, the fire always seemed to be hottest beneath her neck, the heat trickling down her spine. The unrelenting pain, like a hot coal, had gotten beneath her skin. She shuddered, remembering Puny in last night's dream, crying and screaming, blaming Cinder for what had become of her. Dr. Erland was watching her, tapping his port screen against his lips. Cinder squirmed. I have a question. Yes? You said that I wasn't contagious before my body got rid of those microbes. That's correct. So, if I had contracted the plague naturally, say a couple days ago, how long before I was no longer contagious? Dr. Erland puckered his lips. Well, one can imagine that one is more efficient at ridding itself of the carriers every time it comes into contact with them. So if it took 20 minutes to defeat them all this time, I think it would have taken longer than an hour. No longer than an hour the time before that. 2 at the most. Hard to say, of course, given every disease works a little differently. Cinder folded her hands in her lap. It had taken a little more than an hour to walk home from the market. What about, can it cling to, say, clothing? Only briefly. They can't survive long without a host. He frowned at her. Are you all right? She fiddled with the fingers of her gloves, nodded. When do we get to start saving lives? Dr. Erland adjusted his hat. I'm afraid we can't do much until I've had the chance to analyze your blood samples and map your DNA sequencing. But first I wanted to get a better grasp of your body makeup, in case it could affect the results. Being cyborg can't change your DNA, can it? No, but there have been studies suggesting that human bodies develop different hormones, chemical imbalances, antibodies, that sort of thing, after the operations. Of course, the more invasive the procedure, the more. You think it has something to do with my immunity? Being cyborg? The doctor's eyes glowed, giddy, unnerving Cinder. Not exactly, he said, but like I said before, I do have a theory or two. Were you planning on sharing any of these theories with me? Oh yes, once I know I'm correct, I plan on sharing my discovery with the world. In fact, I've had a thought about the mystery shadow on your spine. Would you mind if I tried something? He took off the spectacles and slid them back into his pocket beside the port screen. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Just a little experiment, nothing to worry about. She twisted her head as Dr. Erland walked away from the table and placed the tips of his fingers on her neck, pinching the vertebrae just above her shoulders. She stiffened at the touch. His hands were warm, but she shivered anyway. Tell me if you feel anything unusual. Cinder opened her mouth, about to announce that any human touch felt unusual, but her breath hiccuped. Fire and pain ruptured her spine, flooding her veins. She cried out and fell off the table, crumpling to the floor. Chapter 14. Red light pierced her eyelids. Going haywire, her retina display was sending was sending green gibberish against the backdrop of her lids. Something was wrong with her wiring. Her left fingers kept twitching, pulsing uncontrollably. Calm down, Miss Lynn. You're perfectly all right. Perfectly all right? Are you crazy? What happened to her? Cinder groaned. Only a little experiment. She's going to be fine, Your Highness. See, she's waking up now. Another strangled protest before she could pry her eyes open. The lab's whiteness would have blinded her, but not for two shadows cutting through it. Her eyes focused the shapes into Dr. Erland's wool hat and blue eyes, and Prince Kai with strands of black hair hanging unkempt across his brow. As the retina display began running the basic diagnostic test for the second time that day, she shut her eyes again, faintly worried that Prince Kai would notice the green light at the base of her pupil. At least she had her gloves on. Are you alive? Kai said, pushing her mussed hair back from her forehead. His fingers felt hot and clammy against her skin before she realized she was the one who was feverish. It shouldn't have been possible. She couldn't blush, couldn't have a fever, couldn't overheat. What had the doctor done to her? Did she hit her head? Kai asked. The twitching stopped. Cinder pressed her hands against her body in an instinctual effort to hide them. Oh, she's fine, Dr. Erland said again. Had a bit of a scare, but no harm done. I'm sorry for that, Miss Lynn. I didn't realize you would be so sensitive. What did you do? She asked, careful not to slur her words. Kai slipped an arm beneath her and helped her sit up. She flinched against him and tugged down her pant leg in case the metal gleam of her shin was visible. I was merely adjusting your spine. Cinder squinted at the doctor, not needing the little orange light to tell her he was lying, but it popped up anyway. What's wrong with her spine? Kai's hand slid down to her lower back. Cinder sucked in a breath, a shiver racing along her skin. She feared the pain would come back, that the prince's touch would somehow override her system, like the doctor's had. But nothing happened, and soon Kai lessened the pressure of his touch. Nothing is wrong with it, said the doctor, but the spinal region is where many of our nerves congregate before sending messages to our brains. Cinder watched the doctor with wild eyes. She could already imagine how quickly Kai would pull away from her when the doctor told him he was supporting a cyborg. Miss Lynn was complaining of a bothersome pain in her neck. She squeezed her fists together until they began to ache. And so I gave her a bit of an adjustment. It's called chiropractic, a very old practice, and yet amazingly effective. She must have been more out of alignment than I realized, and so the sudden realigning of the vertebrae created a temporary shock to the system. He grinned at the prince, eyes void of concern. The orange light persisted. Cinder gaped, waiting for the doctor to continue, to move past his lie and start telling the prince all her secrets. She was a cyborg, immune to the plague, his new favorite guinea pig. But Dr. Erland said nothing else, only smiled at her with mischievous eyes that filled her with suspicion. Feeling Kai's gaze upon her, Cinder turned to him, meaning to shrug as if Dr. Erland's explanation made no more sense to her than it did to him. But the intensity of the prince's gaze snatched away her words. I hope he's telling me the truth, because it would be a shame for you to die when we've just had the pleasure of meeting. His eyes glinted as if sharing a secret joke, and she forced the fakest laugh she'd ever heard from her own lips. Are you all right? He said, taking her hand into his. Can you stand? I think so. He helped her to her feet. Not a sign of the excruciating pain remained. Thank you. She backed away from him, brushing herself off, even though the lab floor was immaculate. Her thigh bumped the exam table. "What are you doing here?" he asked, hands falling to his sides and hanging awkwardly for a second before finding their way into his pockets. Cinder opened her mouth but was interrupted by Dr. Erland clearing his throat. "You two have met?" he asked, bushy eyebrows disappearing into his cap. Kai answered. "We met yesterday at the market." Cinder shoved her hands into her pocket, mirroring Kai, and discovered the wrench. "I'm, here because one of the meddlers was acting up, Your Highness," interrupted Dr. Erland. "I requested that she come take a look at it. Her mechanic business has exceptional ratings." Kai began to nod, but stopped and scanned the room. "What Medroid?" "It isn't here any more, of course," said Dr. Erland, his voice chipper as if lying were a fun game. "It's probably off drawing blood as we speak." "Right," said Cinder, forcing her jaw to stop hanging open like an idiot's. "I already fixed it, good as new." She pulled out the wrench and twirled it over her fingers like hard evidence. Though Kai appeared confused, he nodded as if the story wasn't worth questioning. Cinder was grateful that the doctor had so easily devised a story, but it also unnerved her. What reason did he have to keep secrets from the Crown Prince, especially when he could be nearing a breakthrough on plague research? Didn't Kai deserve to know about it? Didn't everyone? I don't suppose you've had a chance to look at, um, I don't suppose you have a chance to look at my, wait, what is his name? I don't suppose you had a chance to look at, I don't suppose you've had a chance to look at Ninzy, Kai asked. Cinder stopped twirling this wrench and clutched it with both hands to keep herself from fidgeting. "No, not yet. I'm sorry. It's been the last 24 hours." He shrugged her words away, but the gesture was stiff on him. "You probably have a client list a mile long. I shouldn't expect royal treatment." His mouth twitched. "Although I guess I do anyway." Cinder's heart tripped as his grin caught her by surprise, every bit as charming and unexpected as it had been at the market. Then her eye spotted the holograph behind him, still showing her inner workings, from the metal vertebrae to her bunched wires to her perfectly intact ovaries. She snapped her gaze back to Kai, pulse racing. "I promise to take a look at it as soon as I can. Definitely before the festival." Kai turned, following her gaze to the holograph. Cinder squeezed her fists together, nerves twisting in the base of her stomach as Kai recoiled from the image. A girl, a machine, a freak. She bit her lip, resigning herself to never receiving another of the prince's heart-stopping smiles, when Dr. Erland stepped toward the holograph and turned the net screen off with a flick. "My apologies, Your Highness. Patient confidentiality. That was from today's draft subject." Another lie. Cinder strangled the wrench, equal parts gratitude and suspicion filling her. Kai shook off his surprise. "That's why I came down here, actually. I was wondering if you made any progress." "Hard to say at this point, Your Highness, but we may have found a potential lead. I'll of course keep you posted on any developments." He smiled innocently, first at Kai, then at Cinder. The look was clear. He would not tell Kai anything. She just couldn't understand why. Clearing her throat, Cinder backed toward the exit. "I should go then, let you get back to work," she said, tapping the wrench against her palm. I guess, I'll be back to make sure the med is performing properly. Say tomorrow?" "Perfect," said the doctor. "I also have your ID number in case I ever need to find you." His smile darkened, just barely, as if to say that Cinder's volunteer status would only last so long as she did return voluntarily. She was valuable now. He had no intention of letting her walk out forever. "I'll see you out," said the prince, flashing his wrist by the scanner. The door breezed open. Cinder held up her gloved hands, the wrench locked in her grip. "No, that's fine. I can find my way." "Are you sure? It's no trouble." "Yes, positive. I'm sure you have very important royal government research things to discuss. But thank you, Your Highness." She attempted an awkward bow, glad that at least this time she had both feet firmly attached. "All right, well, it was nice to see you again. A pleasant surprise." She laughed ironically, surprised to find his expression serious, his eyes warm upon her, and a little curious. "You too." She backed out the door, smiling, trembling, praying that there was no grease spots on her face. "I'll calm you then when your droid is ready." Thank you, Lynn. You can call me Sin." The door shut between them. Cinder would be fine, Your Highness. She sagged against the corridor wall, thumping her knuckles against her forehead. "I'll calm you. You can call me Cinder," she mimicked, then bit down on her lip. "Don't mind the babbling girl." He was the fantasy of every girl in the country. He was so far out of her realm, out of her world, that she would have stopped thinking about him the second the door had closed. Oh, should have. Should stop thinking about him immediately. Should never think of him again, except as a client and her prince. And yet the memory of his fingers against her skin refused to fade. Chapter 15. Cinder had to download a map of the palace's research wing to find her way to the exit. Her nerves were on edge, with the prince, with Puny, with everything. She felt like an imposter roaming the slick white walls with her head bent, avoiding eye contact with the scientist and white-plated androids. Even if she was really a volunteer now, a valuable one. She passed a waiting room, complete with 2 Ned screens and 3 cushioned chairs, and froze, her gaze catching on the window. The view, the city. From ground level, New Beijing was a mess. Too many buildings crammed into too little space, the streets untended, power lines and clotheslines strung across every alley, intruding vines scurrying up every concrete wall. But from here, atop the cliff and 3 stories up, the city was beautiful. The sun was high, and its light sang off glass skyscrapers and gold-tinted roofs. Cinder could see the constant movement of huge net screens and flashing hovers as they darted between the buildings. From here, the city hummed with life, but without all the techno chatter. Cinder sought out the cluster of slender blue glass and chrome buildings that stood sentry over the market square, then tried to trace the roads north, searching for the Phoenix Tower apartments. But they were tucked behind too much city and too many shadows. Her awe slipped away. She had to go back to the apartment, back to her prison. She had to fix Kai's android. She had to protect Eco, who wouldn't last a week before Adri got the idea in her head to dismantle her for scrap metal, or worse, replace her faulty personality chip. She'd been complaining about the android being too opinionated since the day Cinder had come to live with her. Besides, she had nowhere else to go. Until Dr. Erland was able to figure out how to deposit the payment into Cinder's account without Adri finding out, she had no money and no hover, and her only human friend was a prisoner herself in the quarantines. She balled her fists. She had to go back, but she wouldn't stay long. Adri had made it quite clear that she saw Cinder as worthless, a burden. She'd had no qualms dismissing her when she found a lucrative means to do it, a way that could keep her free of guilt, because after all, they needed to find an antidote. Puny needed an antidote. And maybe she'd been right to do it. Maybe it was Cinder's duty as a cyborg to sacrifice herself so all the normal humans could be cured. Maybe it did make sense to use the ones who had already been tampered with. But Cinder knew she would never forgive Adri for it. The woman who was supposed to be the one to protect her, to help her. If Adri and Pearl were her only family left, she would be better off alone. She had to get away, and she knew just how she was going to do it. The look on Adri's face when Cinder entered the apartment almost made the whole ghastly deal worthwhile. She'd been sitting on the sofa, reading on her port screen. Pearl was at the far end of the room, playing a holographic board game in which the game pieces were modeled after the girl's favorite celebrities, including 3 Prince Kai lookalikes. It had long been her and Puny's favorite, but Pearl was now battling strangers over the net, and both looked bored and miserable about it. When Cinder walked in, both Pearl and Adri gaped at her, and a miniature version of the prince fell onto his virtual component's longsword. Pearl paused the game too late. "Cinder," said Adri, setting her port screen on our side table. "How are you? They ran some tests and decided I wasn't what they wanted, so they sent me back." Cinder pulled up a tight-lipped smile. "Don't worry, I'm sure they'll still recognize your noble sacrifice. Maybe even send you a thank you cong." Eyeing Cinder with disbelief, Adri stood. "They can't send you back." Cinder peeled off her gloves and stuffed them into her pocket. "You'll have to file an official complaint, I guess. So sorry to barge in. I can see you were very busy running your household. If you'll excuse me, I'll better go try to earn my keep so you might actually blink an eye the next time you find a convenient way to get rid of me." She marched into the hallway. Eco was poking her shiny head out of the kitchen, her blue sensor bright with astonishment. Cinder was amazed at how quickly her emotions switched from bitter to relieved. For a time, she thought she would never see Eco again. The momentary joy faded when Adri bustled into the hallway behind her. "Cinder, stop." Though tempted to ignore her, Cinder did stop and turn back to face her guardian. They stared at each other, Adri's jaw working as she stumbled over her surprise. She looked old, years older than she had before. "I will be contacting the research facility to check your story and make sure you aren't lying about this," she said. If you ruined this one chance I had to help my daughter." The anger in Age's voice broke, then rose into shrill yelling. Cinder could hear her burying her tears beneath her words. You cannot be that useless. She pulled her shoulders back, gripping the door jamb. What else do you want me to do? Cinder yelled back, flailing her hands. Fine, contact the researchers. I didn't do anything wrong. I went there, they ran some tests, and they didn't want me. I'm so sorry they didn't ship me home in a cardboard box, if that's what you were hoping for. Age pulled her lips taut. Your position in this household has not changed, and I do not appreciate being spoken to in such a disrespectful manner by the orphan I accepted into my home. Really, said Cinder. Would you like me to list all the things I didn't appreciate being done to me today? I've had needles poked at me, and prongs stuck in my head, and poisonous microbes. She cut herself, not wanting Adri to know the truth, her true value. Honestly, I don't care so much what you do and don't appreciate right now. You're the one who betrayed me when I've never done anything to you. That is enough. You know very well what you've done to me, to this family. Garen's death was not my fault. She turned her head away, angry white spots flecking her vision. Fine, said Adri, her voice losing none of its superiority. So you returned. Welcome home, Cinder. But so long as you continue to live in my home, you will continue to obey my orders. Do you understand? Cinder planted her cyborg hand against the wall, fingers splayed out, grounding herself. Obey your orders. Like, do the chores, Cinder. Get a job so I can pay my bills, Cinder. Go play a lab rat for deranged scientists, Cinder. Yes, I understand you perfectly. She glanced back over her shoulder, but Iko had ducked back into the kitchen. And I'm sure you will understand that I've lost half a day of perfectly good work hours. And I'd better borrow your Serve 9.2 to get caught up. You don't mind, do you? Without waiting for a response, she stormed back into her closet of a bedroom and slammed the door behind her. She stood with her back against the door until the warning text on her retina had gone away and her hand stopped shaking. When she opened her eyes, she found that the old net screen, the one Adri had shoved off the wall, had been heaped on the pile of blankets she called a bed. Bits of plastic had spilled over onto her pillow. She hadn't noticed if Adri had already bought them a new one or if the living room wall was empty. Sighing, she changed her clothes, eager to be rid of the smell of antiseptic that lingered on them. She shoved the spare plastic piece into her toolbox and tucked the screen beneath one arm before venturing back out into the apartment. Iko hadn't moved, half hidden in the kitchen doorway. Cinder cocked her head toward the front of the apartment, and the android followed. She did not look into the living room as she passed, but she thought she heard the strangled sound of Prince Kai dying from Pearl's game. They had barely stepped into the main corridor, fairly quiet for once, with the neighbor children off at school, when Iko wrapped her gangly arms around Cinder's legs. How is this possible? I was sure you'd be killed. What happened? Cinder handed the toolbox to the robot and headed for the elevators. I'll tell you everything, but we have work to do. She waited until they were alone and on their way to the basement before filling Iko in on all that had happened, leaving out only the part about Prince Kai coming in and finding her unconscious on the floor. You mean you have to go back? Said Iko as they stepped out into the basement. Yes, but it's fine. The doctor said I'm not in any danger now. Plus they're going to pay me, and Adri won't know about it. How much? I'm not sure, but a lot, I think. Iko grabbed Cinder's wrist just as Cinder opened the chicken wire to her workroom. You realize what this means? Cinder held the door open with her foot. Which part? It means you can afford a pretty dress. Prettier than Pearl's. You can go to the ball, and Adri won't be able to say anything to stop you. Cinder pressed her lips together like she'd just bitten a lemon and pulled her wrist from Iko's grip. Really, Iko? She said, examining her mess of tools and spare parts. You really think Adri's going to let me go now just because I can buy my own dress? She'd probably tear it off me and try to resell the buttons. Well, fine, we won't tell her about the dress or about going to the ball. You don't have to go with them. You're better than them. You're valuable. Iko's fan was whirling like mad as if her processor could barely keep up with all these revelations. I'm immune to letumosis. Immune to letumosis. My stars, you could be a celebrity because of this. Cinder ignored her, stooping to prop the net screen against the shelving unit. Her gaze had landed on a pile of silver fabric crumpled on the far corner, barely shimmering in the dusty light. What's that? Iko's fan calmed to a slow hum. Peony's ball gown. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I didn't think anyone would ever come down here again, or with you, so I just thought I'd keep it for myself. That was bad, Ego. It could have been infected. Cinder hesitated only a moment before walking to the dress and picking it up by the pearl-dotted sleeves. It was smudged with dirt and covered in wrinkles, but there was a chance it had been exposed to leishmaniasis. But the doctor had said the disease wouldn't survive long on clothing. Besides, nobody was going to wear it now. She draped the gown over the welder and turned away. "We're not using this money on a dress," she said. "We're still not going to the ball." "Why not?" Iko asked, a distinct whine in her robot voice. Approaching her desk, Cinder swung her leg up and started unloading the stashed tools from her calf. "You remember the car we saw at the junkyard?" Iko's speakers made a coarse, grumbling noise, the closest she could get to a groan. "What about it?" "It's going to take all our time and money to fix it up." "No, Cinder, tell me you're joking." Cinder was recording a mental list as she shut the storage compartment and rolled down her pant leg. The words scrolled across her vision. Get car, assess condition, find parts, download wiring, blueprint, order gasoline. She spotted Kai's droid on her work table. Fix Android. "I am serious." She pulled her hair back into its tight ponytail, strangely excited. Marching to the standing toolbox in the corner, she started fishing for things that might come in handy. We're going to get back tonight. We're going to go back tonight, get it to the parking garage if we can. Otherwise, we might have to fix it at the yard. Now, I need to go back to the palace tomorrow morning and take a look at the princess droid tomorrow afternoon. But if we're diligent, I think I could have it fixed in a couple of weeks, maybe less. Depending on what it needs, of course. But why? Why are we fixing it? Cinder shoved the tools into her messenger bag. Because that car is going to get us out of here. Chapter 16. Night shift nurses and androids plastered themselves to the walls as Prince Kai barreled through the corridor. He had run all the way from his bedroom on the 16th floor of the palace's private wing, pausing to catch his breath only when he was forced to wait for the elevator. He burst through the door to the visiting room and came to a halt at once, still gripping the door's handle. His eyes found Torin, arms crossed as he leaned against the far wall. The advisor tore his gaze from the glass window and met Kai's panicked expression with one of resignation. "I heard," Kai started, pulling back his shoulders. Wetting his dry mouth, he came into the room. The door clicked behind him. The small sitting room was lit only by a table lamp and the bright fluorescence in the quarantine. Kai peered into the sick room just as a med droid pulled a white cloth over his father's closed eyes. His hammering heart plummeted. "I'm too late." Torin stirred. "It happened only minutes ago," he said, forcing himself away from the wall. Kai took in the advisor's lined face and sleepless eyes, and a cup of untouched tea that sat by his port screen. He'd stayed late to work, rather than return to his own home, his own bed. The exhaustion caught up to Kai all at once, and he pressed his burning forehead against the cool glass. He should have been there too. I will set up a press conference." Torin's voice was hollow. "A press conference? The country needs to know. We will mourn together." Torin seemed shaken for a rare moment. He covered it with a measured breath. Kai squeezed his eyes shut and shaped them with his fingers. Even knowing that the disease was coming, that his father was sick with this uncurable disease, it still made no sense. All that had just been lost, taken so quickly. Not just his father, not just the Emperor. His youth, his freedom. "You will be a good Emperor," said Torin, as he was. Kai flinched away from him. He did not want to think about it, all of his own inadequacies. He was too young, too stupid, too optimistic, too naive. He couldn't do this. The screen behind them hinged, followed by a sweetly feminine voice. "Incoming communication for Crown Prince Kaito of the Eastern Commonwealth from Queen Lavanna of Luna." Kai spun toward the net screen, blanked the first spinning globe in the center, indicating an available comm. Any threat of tears vanished into an oncoming headache. The air thickened, but neither of them moved. "How could she know so soon?" said Kai. "She must have spies." From the corner of his eye, he saw Torin level a glare at him. Perhaps the guards saw you," he said, "running through the castle in the middle of the night. What else could it mean?" Locking his jaw, Kai drew himself to his full height, hailing the screen like an enemy. "I guess our mourning period is over," he murmured, serene except calm. The screen brightened. Kai bristled at the sight of the Lunar Queen, her head and shoulders draped in an ornate cream-colored veil, like a perpetual bride. All that could be seen beneath the shroud was a hint of long dark hair and the ghost of her features. The explanation told by the Lunars was that their queen's beauty was a gift not to be seen by undeserving earthens. But Kai had heard that in reality the queen's glamour, her ability to make people see her as divinely beautiful by manipulating the brain waves, could not translate over their net screens. Therefore she never allowed herself to be seen over them. Whatever the reason, looking at the white-swathed figure for too long made Kai's eyes sting. "My dear Prince Regent," Lavanna said in a saccharine voice, "may I be the first to offer my condolences on the loss of your father. May he forever rest in peace." Kai cast a cool glare at Torin. "Spies?" Torin did not return the look. "Though the occasion is tragic, I do look forward to continuing the talk of an alliance with you as the new leader of Earth's Eastern Commonwealth. As I see no reason to defer these conversations until your coronation. Whatever that shall be, I do think it would be appropriate to plan a meeting as soon as convenient. My shuttle's prepared. I can depart as soon as your next sunrise and come to offer both my sympathies and congratulations in the flesh. I will alert my messenger to expect my arrival. She can ensure that accommodations are adequately prepared. I ask that you don't concern yourself with my comfort. I'm sure you'll have many other concerns during this tragic time. My sympathies are with you and the Commonwealth." She finished her message with a glint of his head, and her screen blackened. Jaw hanging, Kai faced Torin. He squeezed his fist against his sides before they could start to shake. "She wants to come here? Now? It hasn't even been 15 minutes. Torin cleared his throat. "We should discuss this in the morning, before the press conference, I suppose." Kai turned away, thumping his head against the window. Beyond the glass, the peaks of his father's body were obscured beneath the white sheet, not unlike the queen in her veil. The Emperor had lost so much weight in the past few weeks that his form seemed more like a mannequin's than a man's. His father was no longer there, unable to protect Kai, unable to offer advice, unable to lead his country ever again. "She thinks I'm weak," Kai said. "She's going to try and persuade me to accept a marriage alliance now, while everything is in chaos." He kicked the wall, biting back a cry of pain when he remembered he wasn't wearing shoes. "Can't we tell her now? Tell her she's not welcome here?" "I'm not sure that would be the indication of peace your father's been striving for. She's the one who's been threatening war for the past 12 years. Torin pursed his lips, and the haunting worry in his gaze quelled Kai's anger. "Discussions must go two ways, Your Highness. We will listen to her requests, but she must listen to ours as well." Kai's shoulders drooped. He turned around, craning his head back and staring at the shadowed ceiling. "What does she mean, that her messenger will prepare her accommodations? Removing the mirrors, I suspect." Kai squeezed his eyes shut. "Mirrors, right, I forgot." He massaged his forehead. What was it about the Lunars? And not just any Lunar. Queen Lavanna. On Earth. In his country, his home. He shivered. "The people are not going to like this." "No," Torin sighed. "Tomorrow will be a dark day for the Commonwealth."